Does one of the world's most popular apps deserve to be banned?
You got 100 million Americans, 90 minutes a day.
The U.S. government says TikTok threatens national security by putting user data in the hands of the Chinese government. China says the U.S. is violating the principles of a market economy and fair competition. Meanwhile, TikTok calls it all political theater. So, what's the truth? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is TikTok. TikTok has over 1 billion active users across 154 countries. Fun, short videos like this one are shared millions of times.
Biggie!
In order to operate successfully, the app collects a lot of data, like account information, search history, and location data. The same kind of information that apps like Facebook and Google track. There's one main difference, though. TikTok is owned by a Chinese company. Now, this week, the White House backed legislation to give the administration new powers to ban TikTok. In recent months, lawmakers from multiple countries have escalated efforts to try and restrict the app. Regulators in the West are concerned that sensitive user data could be going to the Chinese government. TikTok has repeatedly denied the allegations, but these countries point to a law that allows the Chinese government to secretly demand data from Chinese companies and citizens for intelligence gathering operations. Let's take a look at which countries are banning the app.
TikTok appears to be the latest front in the US-China war of words. It's the fastest growing social media app in the world, but lawmakers in the US say it poses a national security risk.
I absolutely believe that China, with its authoritarian values dominating those technologies, is not in the national security interest of our country, or for that matter, people across the world who don't live in authoritarian regimes.
Currently, more than half of all US states have partially or fully banned TikTok from government devices. And the application has come under fire over fears that user data could end up in the hands of the Chinese government.
But I'm particularly concerned about TikTok's connections to the Chinese Communist Party, which repeatedly spies on American citizens.
But Beijing has denied having any such intentions and criticized the measure.
The United States, the world's #1 superpower, is so afraid of a mobile phone application that young people like so much that they completely lack any self-confidence. We firmly oppose the US side's wrong approach of overstretching the concept of national security, abusing national power, and unreasonably suppressing the companies of other countries.
It's not just the US, though. India banned TikTok in 2020, along with dozens of other Chinese apps, a hit to TikTok, which had over 300 million users in the country. Canada has also banned the app from government phones, saying it presents an unacceptable level of risk to privacy and security, and government employees will also be blocked from downloading the application in the future.
This may be a first step, it may be the only step we need to take, but every step of the way we're going to be making sure we're keeping Canadians safe.
And as of 20th of March, the EU will follow in the US's footsteps and impose a ban on staff devices after growing concerns about China possibly using the data harvested to advance its interests.
The European side should be consistent with its words and actions, respect the principles of market economy and fair competition, stop overstretching and abusing the concept of national security, and provide an open, fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory business environment for enterprises of all countries.
And even Afghanistan's Taliban banned the video sharing platform last year, although for different reasons. It says it's to prevent the younger generation from being misled. TikTok chief executive Chao Zichu is due to appear before the US Congress later this month and will likely try to address concerns. Meanwhile, TikTok's parent company ByteDance has upped its US lobbying effort, It says a US ban on TikTok is a ban on the export of American culture and values.
So how do the actual users of TikTok feel about these new developments?
You know, I have 3.9 million followers right now. Losing that connection to them overnight would definitely be hard for me to rebuild back up.
Apps like TikTok have opened up the door for people of all walks of life and of all backgrounds to share their story and have a place to have their voice elevated in a way that was never possible before. And to take that away, I think that would be what devastates me the most.
I really started loving it when people would actually tell me, Duke, you've changed my life. Duke, they'd come up to me crying, like, Duke, that information you told me, like, I did not know about. So it's the gratitude that I get from it, from other people, that are knowing I am truly creating an impact in this world.
So given the profile of most users, like we saw there, is TikTok really a threat to national security? Joining me now to debate that and more are, from Washington, Darrell West, a senior fellow at the Center for Technology Innovation at the Brookings Institute. Also in Washington is Gillian Diebold, a policy analyst at the Center for Data Innovation. And from Zurich is Gerd Leonhard, a futurist and the CEO of the Futures Agency. Thanks all so much for being with us. You know, I've got to say, I remember, I'm not on social media, and I remember asking a younger social media savvy colleague once if she was on TikTok, and she said, I'm not 20 and I don't dance. So we know that the vast majority of TikTok users are teenagers or 20-somethings who like dancing, they like pop culture, and it seems shallow to plenty of us, but it makes them very happy. So why should governments see this as a threat? Darrell, go ahead.
Well, TikTok is owned by a Chinese company, and every Chinese company has to respect and obey Chinese law. So there are legitimate national security concerns just in terms of to what degree the company is protecting consumer privacy. Are they sharing information with government authorities? I mean, those are the concerns that have been expressed about TikTok.
Okay, but does the government, I mean, particularly in the United States, really care that much about data privacy? We still have Google, we still have Facebook. They can sell our data on to any third party, and it could easily end up in Chinese hands from there. So what would a ban protect us from?
Well, a ban actually would not protect consumer privacy for the very reason that you express. American social media companies also collect a lot of information on their users. There are commercial data brokers who buy and sell information to any domestic or foreign entity. So the Chinese government could be buying consumer data from a bunch of other digital product companies. So the United States does need a national privacy law. Like, we think that would actually be a better way to protect consumer privacy, but so far Congress has not managed to enact that kind of provision.
Okay, so Gillian, why pick on TikTok?
I think it's part of this sort of proxy war just to counter China in a lot of ways. I mean, I want to echo what Darrell said about we really do need that privacy law. If that's what policymakers are really trying to get at, that's what we should be doing. We shouldn't be just banning one single app. Moreover, you know, I mean, if the threat is all of China collecting, or, you know, Chinese-owned enterprises collecting our data, then why are we not banning other Chinese apps? You know, so I think right now those bans are kind of misguided.
Right. Gerd, I saw you agree with some of what's said because, I mean, let's be honest, when you look at the top TikTokers and you see someone like Charli D'Amelio, she's the top. It's really hard to reconcile. I think we have some video of her. You know, when you're watching reconcile what makes TikTok really valuable and how that would connect to national security. She's all about dancing, making duck faces. These videos are 10 seconds long. What really is the threat when it comes down to the core of what TikTok users are?
Well, you know, I think this is really much more a political issue than it is a technological issue. And, you know, supervising social media and video channels and all these kind of user-made things, you know, that's really a topic that is true for every social media company, including Facebook, Twitter, and so on. And that needs to be looked at urgently. The main thing about this is a Chinese company, and governments are worried that they would create backdoors or some nefarious activities especially for government employees. And I tend to agree that government employees probably shouldn't have the app, or for that matter, should have any other app on social media. But I think generally speaking, we urgently need to have some sort of supervision of what's happening in social media, because selling data and essentially ratting out your users is normal now in social media, and we have to address that.
It is, and I feel, I've kind of argued before, consumers, I mean, including myself to some extent, accept it because we're getting a free product. But Darrell, let me come back to you, because the Chinese are making this issue about, crippling the free market and fair competition. Is there something to that?
Well, certainly right now the United States and some other governments are signaling out Chinese companies for extra scrutiny and harsher kinds of treatments, even though a lot of these practices on buying and selling data cut across the entire sector. So I think it's kind of less fair to target the companies of any single country. We should think more systematically about how to protect consumer privacy more generally, regardless of national origins. There certainly are many other digital companies that are compiling a huge amount of data on consumers. They can buy and sell that information through commercial data brokers. So consumers are very much at risk. They think because they're getting a free product that everything is free, but they don't understand in many respects, they actually are sacrificing their personal privacy.
Yeah, Gerd, go ahead. I mean, they don't understand, Darrell says, but do they understand and do they care?
Well, I think they don't really understand, but they do care. And what social media has become is kind of a freewheeling thing that makes a lot of money and tempting people to do a lot of things that they will ultimately regret. And when it's about TikTok and ByteDance, the Chinese parent company, they have now negotiated with CFIUS, the entity that regulates foreign investment, for 2 years to try to get a deal done on Oracle, I think, monitoring the app and so on. So there have been efforts to be above the board, which I think are probably a good idea. Again, like everybody else saying, our problem is more general nature. We need to really do something to make sure that social media is sticking to the rules and not selling everyone out. That is really the issue.
Okay, Gillian, let me come back to you though, because when we look at the Chinese complaints about crippling the free market, I mean, could this backfire on countries like the US and China when they go to battle in these commercial marketplaces that hurt, China's GDP, arguably to an extent? I mean, China can come back with something worse. Are they going into territory that they might not be aware of exactly other harm that could be done?
Yeah, I think it can create kind of a slippery slope. A U.S. ban on this, one, could turn, other foreign adversaries, to ban American apps. So that obviously would hurt, the U.S. economy and small businesses. I think a large portion of advertising revenue now is coming from TikTok, especially for SMEs. So, you have to consider that. And I think another thing that could kind of backfire would be, I was watching the markup hearing for the Republican-led bill to ban TikTok in the House. And, that bill ends up ultimately wanting to sanction a lot of our allies as well, just for allowing this app to exist. So, it creates kind of a treacherous road there, if we
explain that. How does it threaten our U.S. allies?
Well, it's the same thing. So, if the bill is written in a way that it covers, a number of Chinese companies, let's say, video game companies that are owned by Chinese, that are owned by Chinese businesses. What does that do to the video game market in Europe, not just in California? For example, that was something that was really heavily discussed was, what are the implications of a ban on these secondary actors?
Right. Like you said, slippery slope. Darrell, I'll come back to you quickly, because I need you to explain another angle in this, and the fear that the Chinese Communist Party could actually be influencing young people in the United States or Canada via this app. What are we really talking about here? Are we looking at, this insidious way of kind of come election time, they're sending out certain messages, maybe subtly, but they're there? Is that what they're talking about, political interference?
I mean, what people are worried about is the way that TikTok operates is it makes recommendations of videos for you to watch. And so the question is, like, if people are just watching a bunch of dancing teenagers, obviously there's no big national security threat there. But we all know that every social media platform can be used for misinformation and disinformation. So the question is whether a Chinese operated company is going to start using its search algorithms and its search recommendations to start sending you misleading information, information that kind of distorts your views about political candidates in the United States. COVID is still a threat. You know, is there a risk of disinformation in terms of how various countries are handling pandemics? I mean, there are a lot of risks there. And so we don't know exactly to what extent the company is subject to government interference or oversight in terms of how those algorithms are operating.
Yeah, Garrett, what's your feeling on that? Should these governments be concerned about that potential for influence from foreign players?
Well, I very much doubt that is probably currently the target of TikTok's activities, given that they're primarily about quick 10-second entertainment speed watching. However, I think really it's decidedly possible that you can change the algorithm to show more things that would be in your liking. And that is done in every social media platform, from Facebook and so on, to manipulate thinking, as we have seen in many times in the old discussion about Brexit and everything. So basically, it is possible to do that, and I would be worried about that, whether it's Chinese or not, right? I would be worried about that becoming a big issue. As I said earlier, I think it's reasonable to expect government employees, for example, the European Commission has said so, not to have this app or others for that. It's probably not a bad idea, but a general ban, I think it's taken it too far.
Okay. Gillian, let me ask you, as we're talking about some potentially political issues here, in Canada, there is a bit of a political issue on the table because the opposition has used TikTok actually quite well as a campaign tool, while many say Justin Trudeau's party has not. They're not as social media savvy as their opponents. So some are actually saying that's the real motive behind the move to ban it. Is there possibly some truth to that?
That's interesting. I actually haven't heard that idea. So I would say no, but in general, I do think that TikTok could be used as kind of a soft power tool, by China or theoretically by someone within the US or in Canada. I don't know that's the impetus for these bans, though.
Okay, but I mean, if it can be used as a soft power tool and you take it away, people just go elsewhere. Those who craft campaigns will always look for the most creative ways to get their message out. So again, I mean, does it feel like TikTok is unfairly being picked on just because it is Chinese owned and not necessarily for the real damage that it could do?
I mean, I would say yes, ultimately, because again, I think the bigger issues here are privacy and online safety. And so if you really want to get at those issues, there's better ways to do it, like we've said, through privacy laws and through, mandating transparency, disclosure requirements, things like that.
Yeah, you all seem to agree there that there's a bigger issue. Garrett, go ahead.
Yeah, social media is a train wreck, basically, right now. As we can see in every possible way, social media is a huge problem, and the TikTok debate is amplifying this. And that's really what it comes down to. Is it fair or unfair to pick on Chinese providers? Well, that is a big question. I understand the concerns, I understand all of that, but the social media train wreck is really what we're talking about here.
Okay, would you rather see society then just wean itself off of social media as a whole? I mean, do you think its days are kind of numbered anyway?
Some social media companies' days will be numbered. I will not name who exactly, but I'm on TikTok just to experiment a little bit, and I'm on YouTube and Twitter and everything else. I think really what needs to happen, we have to rehumanize social media and put in the filters, put in the moderation, like every other media in the world. We need moderation, balance, supervision, accountability, and all of these things, and we currently don't really have that. The AI is ruling social media, right? What we see is done by algorithms, and that makes for very bad media.
It makes for bad media, but some say it's also a question of freedom of speech. Once you introduce these controls and this moderation, you're looking at curbing free speech, which is a whole nother debate we've gotten into at points. But let me come back to Darrell, because we'll look at another issue here, and then the fact that this is technically a commercial space, as the Chinese are very much pointing out. So there will be companies that are going to benefit from a TikTok ban. Let's talk about those. I mean, who might be behind a kind of nefarious push to get TikTok out of the market?
Well, certainly the companies that would benefit from a TikTok ban are the other major social media companies. So that would include YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and all the other popular outlets. But I think the risk of a ban on TikTok is it could invite retaliation from the Chinese government towards American companies. Now, some of these companies already face exclusion from the Chinese market or restrictions on the Chinese market, so we already have seen that. But people forget most of our electronics are still made in China. Many of the Apple iPhones are manufactured there. America and European countries buy a lot of their pharmaceutical products from China. So we have to be careful that national security concerns don't bleed over into competition policy, and that we're taking steps to limit competition from Chinese companies under the guise of national security. If China sees it that way, they could start putting additional restrictions on American and/or European companies.
Darrell, I'm going to ask you about this. You might think it's a stretch too far, but I know you'll remember in the 1980s and early 90s this anti-Japanese fervor, that Americans were really obsessed with the Japanese pushing the United States and it's especially its technological innovation out of the market, because the Japanese were becoming so powerful and influential. They were destroying the U.S. competitive edge. I mean, it even led to pretty racist products like bumper stickers. I won't even quote what they said, but I remember them seeing them all over Chicago, where I was from. I mean, it faded away, and people kind of realized that it was about a lot of paranoia really over nothing. Does what is happening with China now and this whole TikTok thing smack a little bit of that?
I do remember those days, and in the 1980s, everybody viewed Japanese companies as the big innovators. And of course, what ended that paranoia was the fact that it turned out to be a mirage, that Japanese companies did not become the dominant digital companies of the last 30 years. Instead, the edge moved to American companies and now some Chinese companies as well. But I think, all of this is really against the backdrop of just the changing geopolitics. I mean, Japan actually was and still is an ally of the United States. China is considered an adversary. And so as the world has gotten more complicated, as international alignments have shifted, as there are worries in the United States and Europe about the rise of China and what it means in terms of national security and even the Ukraine war, these types of bans are popping up. So you can't really divorce the bans from the national security issues and/or the changing geopolitics that we can all see.
Right. Gerd, let me get your thoughts on that. I mean, some say Americans are just getting a bit paranoid. We've got the Chinese spy balloon controversy escalating this paranoia. What do you think it's about? We also have to remember, let me point out quickly, that in the U.S. Congress, there are, pro-Chinese lobbyists that are allowed to come before U.S. Congress people and argue the case for China. It's a strange dynamic. How do you think all of this really feeds into the action that's being taken now?
I think, the European Commission has a probably more healthy path on this conversation about competition. And everything in America, I lived there 17 years, is very polarized, and that's one of the biggest issues and driver of things in the US. But I think really what's happening here is we have to understand that the technological arms race, especially when it's about artificial intelligence, for example, right, requires collaboration. If we don't collaborate on artificial general intelligence and AI in general, like ChatGPT and all that stuff, we need international rules, and that means China and the US ultimately have to collaborate to create benefit from these technologies. If we don't do that, we have an arms race like we have with nuclear. And that's definitely not something that we would want. So this is my pitch, I think, really for a measured approach and a collaborative approach to figure out what the future of these apps should be, and not just TikTok.
Gillian, I've got a minute and a half left, and I want to get your final thoughts.
Overall, I think we are rushing any kind of ban right now through Congress, and I think that we should kind of respect that CFIUS process and sort of see how that plays out before enacting any ban. Although I'm not fully optimistic that will happen.
You're not fully optimistic that would happen, and then what are the consequences?
Like we said, the slippery slope begins of, we'll see back and forths of bans going on.
Okay, Gillian, well, let that be the final word. I would like to thank all three of my panelists really so much for being with us. Darrell West, Gillian Diebold, and Gerd Leonhard. Thanks for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We will see you next time.